And it's welcome back to the 19th episode of the Deep Analysis podcast. We love every ugly data, or series 2, episode 9, or rather confusingly, if you use our internal notation for how we understand them, it's episode 2.8, which is why I always get confused because the numbers don't line up because of reasons. Anyway, I'm here. Alan's here. Hi, Alan.
Hello.
For those of you who are new to the podcast, and I messed this up last time around, I forgot to do it in the proper way. So I'm going to do it in the proper way this time. Part of the format of the podcast is telling you the format of the podcast. And here is the format of the podcast. It's 3 topics. It's 30 minutes. The last few, we've been creeping up. We started up really neatly with almost bang on 30 minutes. And we were getting a bit close to like 35 last time. So I'm going to try and be a little bit stricter, but neither is particularly strict on timing or good at stopping talking. So that's one of the problems here. But I'm going to try and be a little bit neater on the timing today. So for topic 1, which was going to be, let's talk about Brazil, but a slightly more important, not more important than Brazil, but more important in terms of its prescience for this podcast came up, which is some survey data, some research data that we've been working on with some partners on AI and unstructured data. And the press release came out 2 days before we were doing this podcast, so we had to really kind of talk about it a little bit. So the survey, I'll put up on screen for people who are there watching. If not, it's the first of our what we're calling a market momentum index on AI and unstructured data, which is something we've done in conjunction with AIM and with mFiles. Alan, just for a background, could you, because you were very much involved in setting this up and devising it with these 2 partners, can you just give us a little bit of background about how this survey came about and what it really was designed to uncover, and then we can get into revealing just a couple of the data points.
Yeah, absolutely. So it came about from discussions with AIM initially. I mean, we know lots is happening. You know, we know there's all the hype around generative AI and RAG and blah, 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 right? And Agentic and there's lots of stuff going on. But we also know that those things are totally dependent on unstructured data, right? So yeah. So that was the conversation, because truthfully, when we looked around, and I guess we're as guilty as anyone, right? Lots of talk, really no hard data to back anything up. Like, well, what is really going on, right? And AIM did a survey earlier this year of its members, and also the members of the Data Management Association, DAMA. And it was really interesting stuff. But what we thought would be fascinating to do, and thank you mFiles for coming in and underwriting this. Yep. And I also thank you mFiles for allowing us to do this genuinely independently, right? Because we didn't know what the answers were going to be. We did not know, and we got some surprises. But basically, yeah, so we went out, we surveyed 500 sort of director, executive type people across 5 industries, which gives us a really pretty solid base of data.
And in this case, it was 500 people in the US specifically.
In the US specifically, correct, yeah. So it's a good sample size. It's a solid sample size. And because we did it sort of equally across 5 industries, you've also got that counterbalance there where you can see if things are out of whack, right? You know, so it's really solid data, and it's been a joy to do, frankly. And this isn't hyperbole. It's the first of its kind. This is the first of its kind. And I really genuinely hope anybody who would take the time to listen to a podcast called We Love Ugly Data is going to go and download a copy of this, because it's freely available from both mFiles and from AIM.
And as ever, depending how you're watching or listening to this right now, it may link to this may be merely millimeters down from where you're watching this, but it'll be in the show notes. So if you're consuming the show notes, they are there. And if you've forgotten the show notes or you're somewhere else, you can just look on an AIM's website or look on mFiles' website. It's distributed there. There will be a small form that you have to fill in, undoubtedly.
Yeah, don't have to pay for it.
But it's free. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's a meaty report. Yeah,
it's meaty. There's a lot of information in there, an awful lot of analysis. But I picked out just a couple of charts, just to give you a flavour of what's in there. And we can have a little discussion about it. If you remember a little while ago, I mean, I've been 2 or 3 episodes ago, we had a kind of graphic on AI featuring a cartoon Alan that we did along with AIM. And funnily enough, this is the survey that came out of the work we started off with that graphic. So one of the things we really wanted to understand, that was the five pillars that you need to be able to answer yes to before you should be getting into AI. One of the questions we wanted to understand here was, what's the, how far are American institutions in the adopting AI? The results, and we got them up on screen here. We kind of divided them up into sort of kind of attitudinal groups, if you like. So, do you believe your use is transformational, accelerated, operational? Are you experimenting? Are you motivated to get start? Are you skeptical? Or are you a little bit concerned to even start? And the longer definitions for what those mean are actually in the data, so you can find out what do we mean by transformational. But what's interesting is the adaptation or the adoption here is far greater than I think we probably would have thought, Alan. Honest with you and I going into this.
It is. There's been a number of things which has come out, which, well, actually, I'm literally today writing our newsletter, so I'm sort of quoting from it here. That they're initially very surprising, and yet the more you think about it and you look at it and you look at the context, you go, it sort of makes sense, right? So, I mean, if you think about it this way with AI, I mean, this is fair enough. I mean, be it Copilot, Gemini, or whatever. People are doing it. I mean, they are, right? And so it's logical that the number's quite high. I think the kind of things which surprised me, though, being a big skeptic, is transformational. 14.4% think it's transformational.
And transformational in this case being, look, we're trying to put AI, not only are we deploying it, I mean, operational and accelerated and transformational are all deployment groups, and operational is just over 20, accelerated is 26%. Transformation is 14.4%. So put them together, that's well over 60% of the marketplace is deploying. But transformation is, we're trying to deploy it everywhere. We believe this is really going to be important for our business.
And I don't think they're going to work out too well. That's my take on that. And you can also flip it and say, well, then 86% aren't, right? But that's a lot. That's a lot of people with some big ambitions.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, and this is all in the analysis of the survey. We need to get into a little bit about, why someone may say they're transformational rather accelerated. We've got definitions in there, but a lot of this is, certainly with this question, is not just that you're adopting AI, but what is your attitude generally towards it? Someone is not going to put themselves in the accelerated group or the transformational group unless they are deploying it, but it's still deploying it with a mindset of positivity towards it. So it shows not only who's deploying it, but how they're feeling while they're doing it, which I think is is kind of interesting. It also allows, of course, to rerun this in 12, 24, 36 months with an identical sample to see whether those things change. As you said, maybe there's a sort of plateau that the people are heading towards. And funny enough, this very morning, I'm going through a bunch more of fresh research data for a different study, which has got some, additional information about how people's adaptation results are going, which you'll see in a few months' time when we that particular one gets released. So it's kind of interesting. But yeah, it's I would guess probably higher than I thought. But again, for all of the I don't want to say hype, but all the heat that's being generated, is not surprising that people are feeling very positive towards it, but they're also being enormously encouraged by their incumbent, particularly their application providers, to try the latest tools, right?
Absolutely, and they are, and we're skipping the Brazil topic, but that's what people were telling me in Brazil. I mean, it's not just the US; it's happening, right?
So the other chart I'd like to bring up, and again, we talked a lot about this before, about how dependent unstructured data is, and it's obviously the other central pillar of this study is not just AI, but it's also AI and unstructured data. So one of the questions we wanted to ask was, hey, your organization's got a bunch of unstructured data. So the question is, at present, in which system is your unstructured data stored and managed? And we asked people to say, email, file shares, cloud-based file shares, SharePoint, DBs, knowledge management systems, ECM, and business apps. Those are the kind of buckets you can put them in. And say to people, well, where is your data within that? And they could use sliders to decide what it is. The interesting thing that's come out of that is that pretty much everybody is saying our data is everywhere, right? The most common response in there was, yeah, it's probably, about 10% in that. So they've pretty much gone, we're not sure. We've put 10% in every bucket because we know there's some in there. We probably just don't know exactly how much.
Yeah, and I mean, and this was something we did expect to find, but it's great to have actual hard data that supports this, right? Because trust me, I'm not going to name and shame, but I know plenty of people out there who would imagine that Microsoft SharePoint, for example, is much, much higher, right? Because they think everything's in SharePoint. No, it's not. It's all over the place. It's all over the place. I mean, another question we did ask here was about SharePoint. And unsurprisingly, guess what? People have lots of SharePoint instances. But this is the first time, to the best of my knowledge, this is the first time anybody's ever actually done this kind of analysis and collected this
we've
data.
always known there's sprawl. We just didn't know what the sprawl is. This gives a better indication of what people believe the sprawl looks like in their organization. That does not mean, and the survey does not suggest this, and we wouldn't say it, does not say that's what it is, right? No. This is what people believe it to be. Now, they may be 100% accurate for their organization, or they might be 1% accurate. But the reality is some people know some of this. And I think there's a lot of bet hedging about the precise nature, which is why people have gone for a similar kind of amount. Yeah, we know we've got that bucket. How far is that bucket? I don't know. There's stuff in it. That's as much as I really know.
Yeah, and I think that points to a big issue, right? We just already said it, but generative AI, for example, is entirely dependent, totally dependent on accurate, relevant, unstructured data.
Yeah.
So people know they have it. Where it is, that's a whole different thing, and that is going to be a big challenge for a lot of these people who are already starting down the road of AI, because this is going to be something that's going to hit across the head.
Indeed, and you and I were just talking about that next study that's coming out in a few months' time. Some of the information in that is on data quality and what data can be included and excluded kind of as is, without having, because it's of the right data quality, and how much has to be thrown in the bin, which is a bit, again, I think when we get to those results, once we validated them, and I think those results will be kind of interesting for people as well. And then, at this point, we're still talking about kind of, generative AI as a kind of assistative thing. But as we get into our next topic, which is a little bit again around agents, remember, with agents, when we talk about AI agents, we're talking about stuff that makes decisions, stuff that can work. And I'm doing the air quotes. If you can't see me, I'm doing the air quotes as autonomous, end air quotes. So the idea is that these things can make choices based on their decisions, and of course, that still involves that data. However, that's not necessarily the important part about topic 2, although I can see from Alan's eye rolling, it may come back, is to talk a little bit about agents and cache. Why agents and cache? Well, I put up a new blog post this week, which it's up on screen. It'll be in the show notes, of course, etc., called "Here Are the Agents and They've Come to Collect." Now, you may remember a little while ago, about a year ago, I wrote something about how the kind of buffet period, the free buffet period for generative AI is going to end. Right now, or certainly at that point, you could rock up and you could fill your plate. This analogy is going to get tortured. I apologize. You could fill your plate with as much AI as you wanted for a flat fee, like a Vegas buffet. However, that was always going to time out once you've become hooked on a particular dish. Still trying to push that analogy, and the likelihood is you end up in a metered position. And that started to happen, along the way, albeit we haven't really noticed it in the kind of, the big Copilot world. That's started to happen behind the scenes. And basically, what I'm suggesting in this post is that that particular shift from generative AI assistants to generative AI agents is likely to see that metering shift increase significantly. And why is that? Well, I'm picking on something that's happened recently. Next week, definitely by the time you listen to this or watch this, Salesforce, Dreamforce will have either be happening or happened. We have to be a tiny bit careful at this point when we're recording this on the 12th, because we're under all sorts of embargoes about things we know we're going to be announced in Dreamforce that we can't talk about yet. But we can talk about them now because this podcast won't come out till afterwards. So we don't have to worry about NDAs particularly. But we know a bunch of stuff is happening. And one of those things that's happening around it is Agentforce. So really, Salesforce's big push into agents. For those of you who read our blogs, we wrote about this in the summer because it was. Thing about Salesforce is they're very good at foreshadowing what they're about to do. They tell you what they're about. There shouldn't be any surprises. And this summer, they were talking extensively about agents without saying, our next thing is going to be agents. And we put 2 and 2 together and wrote, their next thing is going to be about agents. And we talked about, 23 being the year of co-pilots and 24 being the year of assistants. And that's kind of where we've got to. Any points you want to make at this point, Alan?
Well, no, just really on the, I think where the challenge is going to be here is, you're right, we're going to a metered sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
You pay for each time you use it or whatever.
Yeah.
I am really not convinced that there's all that many use cases out there that are worth it.
No, and I think you're almost certainly right, and I don't think there needs to be for the economic sums for vendors, in this case Salesforce, to add up. It doesn't need to be all things to all people. It needs to be enough things to enough people to do it. So let's just take a step back to the earnings call at the end of August. So the earnings calls are one of the things I used to spend a lot of time reading. I spend less time now, but I still try to for key vendors, and Salesforce's ones are really good. And just to remind you, if you want to ever find somebody talking injudiciously about the company they work for, always listen to the CEO. They never stay on message, and they will just start shouting stuff up that probably should be secret. And earnings calls is a perfect example to do that, because it's kind of a bit of a show off in front of financial analysts. And in that, the CEO of Salesforce, Mark Benioff, started talking about, hey, we're going to just start charging $2 per conversation with these agents. Every time an agent has a conversation, you're going to get billed $2 for that. This is actually a real change. I mean, he's talked elsewhere as being a hard pivot for Salesforce. This is a real change. Then he goes on to say, hey, you know what? This is going to be really high margin. Well, I don't doubt it's going to be really high margin at $2 a conversation. But again, this is a conversation had in public that's really many meant for the ears of financial analysts that we can all read and go, okay, so that's how they're going to be doing it. Of interest is that Salesforce actually started to build out a consumption-based or metering-based program called Salesforce Wallet in the summer. So far, it's only really been used for Data Cloud. It's quite complicated as a whole rate card, depending of individual things you're doing, require different credits, and then you have to buy credits to go into your wallet. It's it's something in progress, but it's something else they've been working a little bit towards so far. So that's kind of an interesting thing. Sorry, I interrupted you and just started talking again. Then, Alan.
No, it's the same point. It's like I think you're right. I mean, this will probably work out quite well for Salesforce. I think more broadly speaking, though, I think a lot of vendors are going to hit a wall here.
Yeah.
In as much as so a friend of mine in Brazil, Walter Koch, he's just told this story before, but when he started his career, right, with Xerox, and he was transferred out to India to start building up the business there, pitched to a big government department, and they thought, oh, wow, this is really, really interesting. And they said, well, how much does it cost? I don't know how much it cost, but it was a lot, right? And he gave them the price, and they just started laughing at him. And, they said, we could hire half of India for that kind of money. Mm-hmm. And he was kicked out. And that's the thing, right? At the moment, people, going back to the survey, lots and lots of people are exploring. They're trying to get operational. They're doing stuff.
Yeah.
When they suddenly have to pay every time, that's when some hard decisions are
and I think, I mean, again, there's a certain amount of this. I'm just kicking this about on the earnings call, right? So This isn't an announcement. It could be an announcement by the time you watch this or listen to this. It could be, and obviously we'll follow up on that at the time. We're talking about the $2 a conversation. It's likely to be, hey, well, actually, there's going to be a beginning point and end point in a transaction or a process, a mini process. And if we're able to complete that process as you define it, there will be a token, and it could be $2, it could be 20 cents, whatever. that you will then chip in, having completed that number of steps. Remembering here that the primary difference again between the kind of agent conversation and the assistant conversation. The assistant conversation is normally single step. Do this thing, get that thing, find that thing. For the agent, the idea is to follow a decision tree, a pre-formatted set of things, based on an intent. I've got 10 things I can do. Which of those 10 things is it? If it's not one of those 10 things, I'll come back to you and say no. If it's one of those 10 things, there's a bunch of other decisions I can make after that. It's no more complicated than that, but it is much more transactional, allows you to set beginning and end points in a way that co-pilots as assistants aren't ready to do. So I suspect that we're probably heading more towards that transactional completion as a fee rather than just having the conversation, right?
No, I agree, but I think this is just where you hit hard reality, right? So how do you predict your costs for the year?
Well, yes.
Where's the budget coming from? Is IT paying for this? Is the department paying for this?
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating, but
it does strike me as something that out of the box feels like it sits into call center economics. Because as we know, because we've done a little bit on this ourselves. There are sort of like lines in the sand on call center economics about the cost, cost of an agent, cost of a call, the dwell time between calls, how an agent works out, and it's like, well, we know the agent's call is $1. Therefore, if it's 50 cents, you save 50 cents, right? So it feels like an easy ROI calculator thing to do. Life is more complicated than that the minute you step out of that specific use case, and we would argue it's far more complicated in it actually, even though it seems to work out that well. But it feels like that's kind of where this is, right?
Yeah, it is. But I mean, at the same time, if you take the call center thing, where are so many call centers? Places where people are cheap. I mean, that's just life, right? So, I think it's going to be a tough sell. That's just me.
Well, I guess look, the interesting thing is you're at Dreamforce next week, or so you'll be there. I'll be sat here in this very seat, watching it and writing my notes in my notepad, and you'll be, actually in Moscone, listening to the announcements being made. So that'd be kind of interesting. As ever, if we haven't posted it already, then almost certainly there'll be some coverage that will tell you what's going on with those specific things on deep analysis, and anything that needs to be cross-posted into the show notes for this, we will put into the show notes for this. Last topic for this week. Last couple of episodes, Alan and I and Dan and I talked a little bit about analyst briefings. We did a whole analyst briefing do's and don'ts, and then I wrapped that up into a blog post, just making sure that we had them all in there, and people seem to like that. So we decided we would expand on that a little bit, and we're going to keep doing it. And people tell us not to, or analytics tell us everybody hates it. So one of the things that came out of that, and it was actually a Dan's thing, was about storytelling, and we agree, obviously. And storytelling is an important part of how you go about explaining who you are and what you do and why you do it and who you do it for. And so what we thought we'd pick on storytelling and do actually just another do's and don'ts. Obviously, most of the stuff that we receive is in the forms of analyst briefings. However, I don't think this needs to be just tied into that use case, right? Because this is just how you explain the story of what you do, Alan.
No, I mean, in when I was thinking about this topic coming up, it's funny. I remembered one. It was a box, and it must be at least 6 or 7 years ago. So wow, it must have hit me, right? And it was a case study on stage, and it was somebody from Australia. I can't remember which city, and they basically ran the urban planning, right? And it was a really simple presentation. She explained what they do, which was surprisingly fascinating and complex. I didn't know any of this stuff, right? Oh, whoa, that's a lot more to that than I thought. Then she explained the problem, and then she explained how they use Box, and here was the transformation. It was just like a pitch deck, right?
Yep.
Here's the situation, here's the problem, here's the solution. And it was superb. It was superb. And I remember sitting there when she finished. There must have been 30 or 40 people in line to speak to her.
Cool.
right? That is so good. Whereas, again, we won't name and shame, right? But so often you go to these presentations at conferences, and at the end of it, you're going, I don't get it.
So this sounds like a do. So how could you encapsulate this do in a pithy soundbite, Alan?
Genuinely take the pitch deck approach to almost anything. Here's the context, here's the problem, here's the solution.
Well, it's interesting because we should have rehearsed this, but of course we don't rehearse this because we're too busy doing other things. So I'll pick up my first one, which I've written about story structure. With a thing in brackets is, most people who are doing these kind of presentations regularly have a bunch of stories that they know, right? Customer stories that they know. You have to understand, first of all, why am I telling this person this story, right? So some of these things are not suitable for all audiences. I don't mean because some of them are rude. Or what I mean is you're looking to elicit different responses depending on who you're talking to. So make sure first of all, you're telling the story that you think is going to elicit the right response you want out of this session. And this is particularly, thing with analysts, you have to understand is, why are we listening to this story? It's because, one, we want to be able to recommend you, and we want to know why. Secondarily, we might want to write about you, and we want to know how this helps articulate your value prop, right? It's not a particularly unusual or weird thing, but that's what we do. But in terms of story structure, my favorite one was always tell people what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. So set the story, tell the story, reinforce the story, right? And I think all of those, and you don't have to even do those in one thing. You can start at the beginning and say, hey, this is how we work with this company, and the output was this. You then tell them beginning, the middle, the end of that story. And at the end, then you recap the whole thing. Again, this is not anything that's particularly weird, unusual, or one weird trick that, we'll say this is kind of basic stuff. But think about whether the story is the right story, right? That's the freebie. But the real one here is structure your story with points of reinforcement. Tell him what you're going to tell them. Tell them what you told them. That's my.
Yeah. And I've got a don't.
Okay, well, of course, we need to have a don't.
When you have sort of, a lot of these big conferences, right? They spend a fortune. And they bring in guest speakers, Hillary Clinton, Malcolm Gladwell, I don't know, LeBron. Stevie Wonder, thank you. Yeah, which I missed. Whatever, they bring in these. Here's the thing. If you're a CEO of one of these big companies, don't follow those speakers. Don't do it. I have seen it done so many times. I mean, Malcolm Gladwell, I've seen him a few times now. You're gonna look bad. I don't care if you agree with Malcolm Gladwell. He's one hell of a speaker, and he is so good. Nobody's gonna look good following him.
Yeah.
And so when you bring these people in who generally are really good storytellers, yeah, they are very, very, very good public speakers. Be very careful. Be very careful. I have seen company CEOs. I've left. I've just literally stood up and walked out because I couldn't sit through it.
So how would you encapsulate this one again in a pithy soundbite, Alan?
If you're a CEO of a successful company, that's what you are. Yeah, you're not Malcolm Gladwell.
So limit your storytelling to what you're good at.
Limit your storytelling and your style to what you're good at. Don't try it on. And again, the only one I think who's ever really pulled it off was Aaron Levy of Box. When he chats with the celebrities, I gotta be honest, he does it pretty well, right? Yeah. But generally speaking, those executive chats with celebrities are cringe.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've gone a tiny bit off piste, but while we're off piste, I'm gonna just jump into the waist deep snow with you and say, if that particular niche of exec from company interviews guest, right? Stop pretending you know them and they're your friend. They are not your friend. You don't know them. So that bonhomie looks weird. Don't do it.
You never met until this morning, and they're just going to pick up a chain and leave. It's
what they do. It's what they do, right?
Yeah, I know. It's just cringe.
So back a little bit onto sort of the storytelling topic, and my don't, and it's a really simple one, is don't use your storytelling to diss the opposition. Right? Part of your story isn't, well, we had to come in and rescue it because this vendor and name them made a mess. Right? Don't do that. Right? Don't ever mention them. This is a story about you and what you do well. Now, it may be actually that story is about underneath. That's why you came in. Park that. Don't talk about that. Well, it doesn't look very good, right? So you have no idea the person you're talking to, whether they have bought that, used to work there. I mean, you should know because you should research people before you meet them, which there should be another. When we get into meeting organization, look on LinkedIn where that person used to work before. It's a really good idea and will save you a lot of embarrassment. But back on the topic again, don't make your pitch about the failings of others. Make it about what you do well and articulate what you do well.
Never, ever do it in a briefing to us.
Oh God, no.
It's just not, it's not cool. I mean, we sometimes have a dig at Gartner and IBC and we shouldn't do it. I mean, we all slip into it, right? But if you're telling me that your product is so much better than your rivals, all I'm taking from that is your rivals winning deals against you. That's the only takeaway. They're keeping you awake at night. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, right? There's an example. I'm not going to get into it all, but you know somebody's being needled. That's all that's telling you.
I think that's one of those things we should be. I'm not saying that's not a legitimate thing to discuss. It's certainly not legitimate to discuss with analysts. And you know what? It should be on a list of things that I need to keep good. It's valid, but save it for your sales kickoff.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Talk to your Salesforce and your partners about it. That's when you get into competitive intelligence, if you want to call it that, and not just bitching, because that's what it ends up sounding like more than anything else. Right. It's important, maybe, to you to how you sell and how you co-sell with partners and whatever. Save that for your SKO, right?
Yeah.
Don't deal with it on presentation.
Just double down on that, because the worst is when they diss a competitor and they tell us they are replacing the competitor. We know for sure it hardly ever happens. Right? Nobody replaces SharePoint. They might install your system alongside it, but they're not replacing it. All right.
Okay, well, that's it for this episode of. I'm actually much better on timing. We're only over by about 2.5 minutes, which is pretty good for us. So, thanks, Alan. Thanks for joining. Go enjoy yourself in San Francisco.
Thank you. Next
time, 3 more topics, 30 minutes to discuss them in. Thank you very much again for joining us, and we'll speak to you soon.